Well, hello and welcome to today's episode of the Power of Your Mind podcast. You're listening to episode number 180. I'm Victoria Gallagher, the Law of Attraction hypnotist and #1 best-selling author of Practical Law of Attraction. Align yourself with the manifesting conditions and successfully attract your desires. I'm also the founder of hiptalk.com and HypnoCloud apps, which gives you access to over 500 hypnosis recordings right in the palm of your hand. So be sure to download that app from the app stores today. And today I have a very special guest with me, Doug Noll. Douglas Noll he left a successful career as a trial lawyer to become a peacemaker. His calling is to serve humanity, and he executes his calling at many levels. He is an award-winning author, a teacher, a trainer, and highly experienced mediator. Doug's work carries him from international work to helping people to resolve deep interpersonal and ideological conflicts, to training life inmates to peacemakers and mediators in maximum security prisons. And he can be found on his website, dougnoll.com, and on Facebook, Douglas Noll. And today we are going to be talking about how to have a calm conversation with the politically polarized. And Doug also has a book which you can get on Amazon. And that book is called De-Escalate: How to Calm an Angry Person in 90 Seconds or Less. I love that title. So welcome to the show, Doug. I am so excited to dive into today's very relevant conversation.
Thank you, Victoria. Actually, I have created a very special, unique webpage for your audience on my website, dougnoll.co/power of mind.
I love
And
it.
that page will be up after we're done with the show. And on that page, people can get a free ebook about what we'll be talking about. They can get access to my book. They can get access to a video course on how to de-escalate somebody, and they can get a 50% discount off one of my premier courses, How to Develop Emotional Competency. Only for your audience, 50% discount off, only for your audience. And
Thank you so much. That is super generous. And I want to correct that. I think it's Power of Your Mind.
Power of Your Mind. Well, I'll make sure that's what the URL will be. So again, dougnoll.co/power of your mind.
Love it. That is a very, very generous offer for our gifts and for our guests. And it's going to, help to continue this conversation that we're going to have today. So I'm really excited to dive into that. And so tell us a little bit about your background and how you went from being a trial lawyer to a peacemaker, which almost seems like contradicting of each other.
Right. Well, actually, some of the greatest peacemakers in the world were lawyers. Most people don't know that Mohandas Gandhi, was a lawyer. He practiced law for 30 years before he started a Satyagraha movement in India. Abraham Lincoln, of course, was a lawyer. So lawyers throughout history have taken major roles as peacemakers in their times. So my journey started. Okay, so let's take it. I was born with a lot of disabilities, which kind of formed my early childhood. I was born deaf, blind, nearly blind, crippled, 2 club feet, couldn't walk until I was 3. Lots of disabilities. And in those days, you were called handicapped. But since I grew up in affluence, my parents didn't want to have the shame of having a handicapped kid. They just made me power through everything. And so I had a really rough childhood.
Wow. Let me just back up a second. You're born deaf.
Right.
Partially blind.
Right.
And crippled.
Right. 4 surgeries before I was 3, couldn't walk until I was 3.5.
Okay. So tell us, I'm just.
And left-handed.
Okay. Okay. So I'm like, you appear to
Normal,
hear
right.
and speak and see perfectly as far
Right.
as I can tell. So how did you overcome all that?
All right, so the deafness is high ion frequency that I can't hear. So that persists. My eyes, and no one could understand why, besides all the other problems I had, why I was not doing well in school. So they're going to hold me back in the 4th grade. And finally, some school nurse had the bright idea to test my vision. Of course, now it's standard. Back in the 1950s, it was not standard. Tested my vision, found out that my vision was 2400. I couldn't see anything. I saw enough to be able to navigate the world, but I would have never gotten a driver's license with 2400. And so I got these big, thick Coke lens glasses and black lenses, which were pretty stylish a few years ago, but back then, not stylish at all, but I could see. And I leapt forward 3 grade levels in one summer just by reading, because the other thing I was gifted with was a very big intelligence. And I was quite fortunate in that respect. So the legs, 2 club feet, left foot, 4 surgeries, started. So I was already 3 years behind everybody else in terms of ability. Never learned how to skip, couldn't run very well, became a swimmer. And over the years, through a lot of therapy, the leg never has come back. I've still got an ankle that doesn't bend very well, and my left leg is a little bit atrophied, but I overcame that. I became a rock climber, a whitewater river guide, a level 3 ski instructor, level 3 certified PSIA ski instructor, and so which is why I live where I live in Central California in the Sierra Nevada, because I love the mountains. So I was able to overcome a lot of this stuff through just stubbornness and persistence and discipline. But it didn't help my emotional character at all. I mean, I was, like many people, very wounded and very shamed and lots of difficulty growing up. And my mother to this day apologizes, you had a really rough childhood and we didn't make it easy on you. And even though we lived in affluence, one of the wealthiest communities in Southern California, if you weren't athletic, you were nothing. So I was a total buzzkill for the girls.
Well, at least you can laugh about it now.
I know. So anyways, but my intellect was good. And once I got glasses and could start reading, all of a sudden my brain kicked in and the intellect started to shine. And again, another buzzkill. But I attended Dartmouth College, Ivy League, came back to California, went to law school, worked for a judge for a year, then went into private practice and I actually joined my firm in September of 1978 and tried my first jury trial 2 months later, unheard of, all by myself. Senior partner came in 3 days before the trial and handed the files to me. You're trying this case in Madera County Superior Court in 3 days, get ready.
Did you win your case?
I did.
Wow.
And then the next case was defending a $36 million securities fraud case, very serious, lots of money in those days, down in San Diego in federal court, the Southern District of California. That lasted 7 months. And that was what my beginning at my training as a trial lawyer. And so for the next 22 years, that's what I did. But along the way, you'll appreciate this, I took up the martial arts. And ultimately, I earned my secondary black belt. And my teacher called me in and said, you're done here. You've got to go learn Tai Chi because you're an asshole. You're an arrogant trial lawyer, secondary black belt, all true. And said, I can't teach you anymore. You're too dangerous. So go learn Tai Chi. Well, Tai Chi, I did that. And Tai Chi has 2 really interesting paradoxes. The first is the softer you are, the stronger you are. The more vulnerable you are, the more powerful you are.
I love that. I totally agree with that.
Well, let me tell you, did not compute.
Yeah.
I mean, a hardcore trial lawyer, secondary black belt in a Northern Chinese animal style Kung Fu. We broke bones, not boards. That was our motto. We were barred from all competitions because we just didn't practice pulling punches. I remember my black belt test lasted a week and I got knocked out 3 times and knocked out some of my peers 4 or 5 times. I mean, it was full on combat. Anyways, Tai Chi was very interesting. And I struggled with it for a long time until it started to seep into me. And one day I was in a courtroom cross-examining somebody in my own inimitable style. And the thought came to me, what the heck am I doing in here? Well, I had a vacation planned after the trial to go on a whitewater trip. So I went on the trip and we were up on the main salmon in Idaho with a bunch of friends and spent the week on my raft all by myself, thinking about how many people I'd really served, and came to the conclusion that this is not working. So when I came back to town, and then that Monday after that trip, drove into my office, I heard, the universe always provides. So in this case, I heard the one and only public service announcement on our public radio station for a new master's degree program in peacemaking and conflict studies being offered at Fresno Pacific University. Fresno Pacific is the West Coast Mennonite University, and the Mennonites are one of the three traditional Protestant peace churches. Caught my attention. And ultimately I enrolled. And so from the mid 90s until 2000, I was a full-time graduate student again, and a 3/4 time law professor, and a full-time trial lawyer. So I began the master's program. My teachers were amazing and completely opened my eyes to human conflict. And I really saw the inadequacy of the law for solving human conflict. I mean, I believe in the rule of law, obviously, and I think the legal system is extremely important, but it's been asked to do too much. The legal system is not good at dealing with most human conflict, but because it's the only system we have, people run to it when they have problems that absolutely don't belong there. We can't talk to each other anymore and settle our differences. We have to go lawyer up. And that's wrong. So I wanted to learn other ways of resolving conflict, and I did. So ultimately, my partners did not like the idea of me being a peacemaker. They'd rather have me make big bucks as a trial lawyer. And I said, forget it. And I walked out with 1 week's notice, left $10 million on the table, and started my peacemaking practice in November of 2000. And it was the best decision I've ever made in my life. Don't make nearly as much money, but boy, do I help a lot of people. So we'll fast forward to 2005. I was in a mediation. And as we discussed before the show, I had studied active listening and nonviolent communication, all these different listening techniques, and none of them worked. And I concluded that they were all psychobabble BS, which they are. And none of that stuff. The active listening was a term coined by psychologist Thomas Gordon in 1968. First mention of it is in a chapter he contributed to a book written by Carl Rogers. And none of his work is based on science. It's all based on just his speculation. And it doesn't work. It never, you all know, we've all taken classes where we learned about I statements. Oh, what I think your feeling is, or what I hear you saying. It's patronizing, condescending, it's rude, and all it does is make people madder. Same thing with nonviolent communication. Rosenberg basically, in my opinion, stole the idea from Gordon. As it turns out, he was also a graduate psychology student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where Gordon was and where Rogers was. And he just repackaged it as nonviolent communication. When you look at nonviolent communication, you look at the Gordon method, they're exactly the same. Gordon was 20 years ahead of Rosenberg. So I took nonviolent communication courses, totally worthless. And to this day, I still believe they're worthless. And if you read the academic literature, scholars other than myself who have studied this agree with me. So I didn't have anything. And one day here in 2005, I'm in a very intense mediation between a couple who had been divorced for 20 years. They were in a fight over an $18,000 problem. They'd spent $50,000 in attorney's fees.
Makes a lot of sense.
Right. The attorneys had given up on them and said, no, come in and fix this thing. We don't want to see or hear from these people again. So we were in this conference room in Santa Barbara, and I sat down, and as soon as I sat down, they started screaming obscenities at each other. And had there been knives on the table, there would have been blood on the floor. It was that close, this close to violence. What am I going to do? Well, the thought came to me out of the blue, listen to emotions. So that's what I did. I stopped him. I said, Susan, what's John feeling right now? And she says, he's really angry. Tell him that. Oh, John, you're really angry. Yeah. Good. Tell us more, John. So he starts telling his story. Stop him. What's he feeling right now? He's really frustrated and angry. Tell him that. Oh, you're really frustrated and angry. Yeah. Within 10 minutes, she went from being victimized to being empowered. And he went from being enraged to being calm as a cucumber and feeling, yeah, that's right. So after she was done listening to him, I reversed roles She listened to his emotions as she told her story. And when the whole thing was done, he put his face in his hands and he started sobbing, uncontrollable sobs for like 3 or 4 minutes. And finally, he got up, he blew his nose, cleaned up, and looked across the table and said, "That's the first time you've listened to me in 25 years.
That is amazing. So you literally just listened to some instinct, some hunch that you had that
That's right.
said, in that moment,
That's right.
let me just
Now,
have her.
that's right. It was informed by 5 years of deep, intensive study of neuroscience. So it came to me, but obviously my brain had been percolating on this preconsciously for a long time. They walked out holding hands and had lunch with each other. I was so stunned you could have picked my jaw up with a forklift. But I knew I'd done something. I knew exactly what I'd done. So I said, is this a fluke or is this really something? So I started doing it in other conflicts that I was called to do, and it worked every single time. And then I started teaching it because I'm a professor and a teacher and mediator trainer, and I'm called into a lot of professional groups to teach workshops on how to do this stuff. And people got it, but were giving me a lot of skepticism and pushback. And then in 2007, Matthew Lieberman and his team at UCLA, neuroscientists, did brain scanning studies that showed why this concept known as affect labeling worked. And now all of a sudden we have science that explains why this works the way that it does. There's no other technique or idea that has any kind of brain scanning study behind it to show the efficacy of the skill. This is it. I said, great. Now I've got some science. And so I continued to teach, and I was still getting skepticism. So then in 2010, I got a call from my colleague, Laurel Coffer, who's a dear friend and mediator in Los Angeles, who read a letter to me that she'd received from a woman serving a life sentence in the largest, most violent women's prison in the world, which happened to be about an hour or so from where I live. And the woman was asking Laurel to come in and train the lifers to be peacemakers and mediators because they were tired of the prison violence. And she read the letter to me and said, "What do you think?" And I said, "I think we should do this." Well, that was a life-changing statement, because the next year we finally got permission to start. And the next year, April of 2010, we started with our first cohort of 15 women, all ethnicities, ages 30 to 65, different educational levels, different backgrounds, but they were all lifers. They had all already killed somebody one way or another. And that was one of the most transformative experiences of my life. And certainly for them, it was transformative. All but 2 have now been released. And Prison of Peace, that was the beginning of Prison of Peace. Prison of Peace still goes on. I mean, we're in 15 California prisons, 15 prisons in Greece with a colleague, and 1 prison in Connecticut. And it's growing like crazy. We've had over 4,000 of our students released on parole, 0 reports of recidivism. Not one of our students is reoffended.
Outstanding. That's mind blowing. And
Right.
and when you say these were lifers, and they've been, most of them have been released.
Yeah, all but 2 or 3.
I mean, it's like almost like a miracle that
It
that
is,
you've.
but it's not, because it's based on brain science.
Yes.
Let me tell you one story to illustrate, which is the first big story I heard. Of course, I have hundreds of them, to illustrate the power of. First time I realized the power of what we had. We walked in about week 4 into a conference room where we were teaching, and one of our students, a woman by the name of Sarah, was sitting over in the corner, kind of in the dark, because these are dingy conference rooms in prison. They're not very pleasant places to teach. And she was sobbing. So Laurel walked over, and I followed Laurel. Laurel knelt next to her and said, "What's going on?" And Sarah told us the story. She said, "I've been in prison for 18 years. I was an alcoholic, and I killed a family of 4 in a car accident. And I came out of the wreck unscathed. I was sentenced to 25 to life, and I had to give up my son, who was 3 years old, to my sister to raise. I've written him a letter every week for the last 18 years and never have heard a word from him. A couple of days ago, I decided to write a letter based on what you guys have been teaching about how to listen to emotions. And I imagined all the emotions he must have felt about a mother who he felt abandoned him and shamed him. And I wrote that letter. And this morning, I got my first letter from him.
Oh,
And he said, he was very angry, and he had a right to be. But at the end, he said, Mom, I love you. I'm bringing my girlfriend, and we're going to come visit you in 2 weeks. And then she started to weep again. And what I learned from that was that all she had to do was fulfill his gut need to be validated by his mother. And when he did that, the estrangement was over with. And I thought to myself in that moment, and today it sends shivers down my spine. I thought, what have we unleashed on the world? And after that, story after story after story after story. And eventually the inmates were all bugging. They knew I was an author, and they bugged me to write my 4th book, De-Escalate, How to Calm an Angry Person in 90 Seconds or Less, which I did because the inmates, our students, our incarcerated students, wanted something that they could tell their parents or their families to read, because they were learning these skills. They were changing. The families saw these amazing transformations occurring, could not understand what was going on. So the book, there's some funny stories around the book too, but ultimately it was published by Simon & Schuster in September of 2017 and has become a bestseller. And I don't need to talk about that, but it really laid down these stories and how to do this work. And that's how it all started. And as a result of that, and as a result of working in maximum security prisons for 11 years and mediating and teaching and training, and I'm still a professor, graduate professor, I've just seen the transformations that occur when you learn these basic skills. And so I've devoted my whole life to teaching as many people as I can how to do this, because this is the secret to happiness.
it is. It is. It's so beautiful. These stories are so beautiful. And I really, really feel like, I mean, I was called to have you on the show because I know, I just could tell that what you do is just going to be so transformational. And I really believe that everybody needs to learn how to do this. And, so the question on, this creates a couple of questions for me. I mean,
of course, I'm surprised if it didn't.
I've learned, throughout my many, years in personal development, as we talked about, many different communication techniques. And part of the reason why you learn these is because, it's not just one person that's heated in that moment, but usually both people are heated in that moment. So the difficulty really comes in how does this conversation start? Like, if, say, you have the information that that, okay, this is the way that I'm going to get this person to calm down. How do you get yourself into that state? How do you, and it's like a 2-part question, because usually there's always that sense that, like, they're doing something wrong. You never really feel like you're the person that has the wrong opinion or that is acting the wrong way, but it takes 2 to tango. And so who goes first?
Okay, a really basic foundational question, and it's important that you ask that question. Listening is not conversation. It involves a completely different set of skills that we've never been taught. Never been taught. 96% of all families are emotionally dysfunctional. Emotionally dysfunctional families produce emotionally dysfunctional adults. Some people are able to overcome that, many are not. But one thing that does not happen in families is how to listen, because parents don't know any better. So here's how it's done. The first thing you do when you're confronting somebody who's really angry is you ignore their angry words. Remember, you're not in conversation, so you don't have to listen to them. You don't have to listen to their words. You want to ignore their words so that you don't get triggered yourself, and so that you free up bandwidth to be able to do the next 2 steps. So ignore the angry words. It's new, you know what they are. You've heard them many times before. Just ignore it. The second step is to let your brain do its thing, which is quickly and efficiently and accurately assess the emotional experience that the speaker is having in the moment. And of course, there's going to be anger, but underneath anger, there's going to be 4, 5, or 6 other emotions. And your job is to identify what those emotions are. And your brain will do this automatically. You don't even have to work at it. It's effortless. And the third step, and this is what trips people up because it seems so weird, but remember, you're listening, not having conversation, is you reflect back the speaker's angry emotions with a simple you statement. No I statement, no questions, you statement. So supposing, Victoria, that you were really angry, I would say to you, Victoria, you are really angry. You're really pissed off. You're frustrated. You're upset. You feel disrespected. You feel like you're being ignored. You don't feel supported. You don't feel appreciated. And you're really sad because you feel betrayed by people who you trusted, and you feel abandoned. And all of this is just really making you angry.
And when you say that, and I can just envision myself in a situation where I would feel like that, and it would be completely dismantling, completely like, I would probably cry. I would really take that in, and just the guard would just melt.
Right. And it all happens unconsciously. And this is what Lieberman studies have shown, why it works in the brain and how it works. It's that powerful. And it works every single time. Doesn't matter what culture you're in, doesn't matter what the language is, doesn't matter where you live in the world, because every human brain is hardwired to receive this information and to calm down. But this flies in the face of everything we think we know about listening. So I would be interrupting you, and I would be, but that's rude and patronizing, or it's manipulative. No, I'm listening and not having a conversation. And as I reflect on your emotional experience, you're able to process it in a more efficient way. I'm literally lending my prefrontal cortex to you to give your prefrontal cortex time to, there's a lot of technical stuff that goes on here that's beyond the scope of our conversation today, but basically to reconnect with an emotional database that you have and to reprocess the emotions. And that's what causes the calming effects. So it's powerful. And you can literally calm any angry person in 30 to 45 seconds. It's particularly powerful with children. And if you want to see behaviors change in children, just label their emotions. In fact, I teach parents, do not ever discipline a child until you've calmed them down first, until you've listened them into existence, because the teaching, the discipline, which is designed to teach, will not take unless they're in an emotionally calm place to learn. That's common sense. But what do parents do to a screaming 2-year-old? Slap them around, go to your room, shut up, be quiet. Worst thing you can do to a child. That's emotionally abusive. And it's the worst kind of emotional abuse because it's destroying the toddler's brain's ability to emotionally mature. That's why I say 96% of families are dysfunctional, because parents abuse their children, no matter how loving they are. They abuse their children every single moment. They don't even know they're doing it. And the study after study after study shows the horrible effects that happen in life because of it. So for example, let me give you a quick example.
Sure.
You remember when you were young, 2 years old, you're out running around and you fell over and scraped your knee and started to cry?
Yep.
What were you told?
I mean, most of the time, it's always, stop crying. It's
That's
okay.
Right. Don't be a sissy. It doesn't hurt. Rub dirt in it. Don't be a girly girl. Be tough. Right?
Yeah.
Every child is fed that language. What's the subtext of that language?
It's not okay to be who I am.
Okay. It's not okay to be who you are. It's not okay to feel emotion. And you know what's even worse is, why do parents do that? Not only because they don't know, it's worse than that. It's all unconscious, but they are soothing. Hold on, listen. This is
okay.
Important.
Yeah.
They are learning. They are soothing their own anxiety over their child's emotions. So it's extremely selfish, and they don't even know they're doing it. But what they're really doing is soothing their own anxiety. They're trying to get trying to get their child to be calm, so they don't have the anxiety over the child's emotions, because the parent is emotionally incompetent and does not know how to manage his or her own anxiety around their little child, their little children's emotions. It's horrible. And it's the reason they do that is when they haven't been trained. It's what happened to them when they were parents. And this goes back for generations, probably goes back thousands of years. And it's the leading cause, according to the ACEs study, Adverse Childhood Experiences study out of Kaiser Permanente. It's a leading cause of cancer, diabetes, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, obesity, drug addiction, antisocial behavior, criminal behavior, depression, and relationship breakdown in the form of divorce and domestic violence, all caused by this form of emotional abuse that occurs in every single family. We emotionally invalidate instead of emotionally validate.
And they have such good intentions. It's not
They do.
like it's not like they're doing
malicious.
this.
They think they're toughening their kid up. They're actually destroying the child, destroying the child's ability to be emotionally mature.
This is so important.
It's
so
absolutely, which is why I do 4 or 5 podcasts a day, is I'm trying to get this word out and get people to know that there's a better way. If I could just get parents to practice this, we would not have prisons in 20 years.
I believe you're right. Now, here's a question. So the reason why parents do this is because they are stabilizing their own emotions. They, are trying to calm themselves down, and it's selfish. So how let's just say it's a single parent and they don't have anyone to validate their own emotions. Is this a practice that a person can apply on themselves?
Absolutely. Yes, it's called self-affect labeling. You can label, if you can learn how to label your own emotions as you experience them, you will literally calm yourself down. And the brain scanning studies show this too. So you have self-affect labeling, where you label your own emotions to calm yourself down, and you have third-party affect labeling, where, as I demonstrated with you, where I'm listening to another person. Both are effective at calming people down, and particularly effective with children. You can calm. I've had reports, lots of reports of parents of 2-year-olds who say that after 4 months of affect labeling, no more tantrums, no more upset. In fact, the toddlers are running around affect labeling everybody else because they're great mimics. But as they learn to affect label, they're building their own emotional self-awareness. They're building their own emotional self-regulation. And the studies show that parents who affect label their children from the time of verbalization, 18 months to 2 years old, up until about 9 years old. By 9 or 10 years old, those children are 3 grade levels ahead of their peers.
Amazing. That's
Yeah.
This just, and again, this is why I wanted to have you on the show, is because, I really do believe that this could change the world. This is going to change the way we communicate, the way we hear each other. And like you said, as a result of that, people will ultimately avoid getting themselves into these types of diseases, because the emotions lead to all the diseases that you talked about. So let's bring this into like 2021.
Political polarization.
Yes. We're in such opposite. And it's like it seems like the more these things get discussed, the further apart we get. When it comes to everything.
Right.
Politics, masks, vaccines,
Yep.
You name it. Any of those words are just automatically sending people on 2 sides of the fence, and we're just further apart than I've ever seen. And honestly, this divide is so scary. It's quite frankly, it's scary how far apart people are getting, and the anger that is ensuing as a result. Right. So how do we solve this using?
Okay, so I have spent a lot of time thinking about this. And first of all, we have to recognize that the polarization is not being caused. The polarization is being caused by politicians who are trying to protect their power position and privilege. And it's also being caused by media outlets who are trying to profit off of agitation. So the first thing we have to recognize is this is not being caused by us citizens, no matter what our beliefs are. We are being propagandized by people who are profiting off agitation and conflict. and fear. That's the first thing to recognize. Now, let's suppose that we're in a conversation with Uncle Joe, and Uncle Joe is politically polarized from us. And I don't care where you sit on the fence, which side it is.
Mm-hmm.
Uncle Joe could be a hardcore socialist liberal, or he could be a hardcore hard right Republican. It doesn't matter. 4 questions. You want to ask 4 questions. First of all, your agenda has to be not to persuade, but to listen and learn. If you have to persuade and convince somebody that you're right and they're wrong, you will not go anywhere with a politically polarized person. So it's listening, not conversation. Here are the 4 questions. So I'll say, okay, so Victoria, tell me about all of the life experiences that you've had that lead you to the beliefs that you have today around this issue. Let's call it math. Let's call it vaccination. What are all the life experiences that have led you to the beliefs you have around vaccinations? Tell me about, I'm really curious. Tell me about that. So now I'm inviting you to tell the story. And as you tell me the story, I'm going to label your emotions. Oh, you're really frustrated. You're really angry. You don't feel heard. You don't feel, whatever it is. I'm just going to affect label you. Just, it's all listening mode.
Mm-hmm.
Second question. So how do your beliefs help you navigate the world on a day-to-day basis? How do these beliefs help you? What are they actually doing for you? Most people have never been asked that question before, and they don't think about it.
Right.
And I want them to
I
think
wonder if most people would be able to answer that question.
Probably not. But you're patient with them and say, well, how do you think these beliefs help you? And a lot of people will get the insight that the beliefs are heuristic shortcuts that allow us to make decisions without having to invoke what's known as system 2 thinking or analytical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And so beliefs are, and if we didn't have beliefs, we couldn't function. So it leads them to the idea that beliefs allow them to deal with the ambiguous and complex, my graduate students, I call it a VUCAR world: volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, and risky. And unless you've had significant undergraduate and graduate training in how to deal with complexity, your brain can't handle it. And so you react in fear. So belief structures can help people navigate a VUCAR environment without being overwhelmed by anxiety. So maybe they can reach that conclusion, maybe they can't. But you ask the question, how do your beliefs help you? And then third question, what do you do when you run across people with different beliefs than you? Mm-hmm. And of course, the snarky response is I take out my AK-47 and shoot them. That's the typical response. No, I get that. But what do you do? I mean, you run around in town and you find people that have beliefs that are different than you, or maybe you have family members that have different beliefs. What do you do? And they'll say, basically it'll boil down to I avoid them, which is okay. Because then we get to the fourth question, which is, well, how do you think our society should be organized? We got all these people with all these radically different beliefs. How should our society be structured to accommodate polarized and opposite beliefs? How do you think our society should be structured? And first they're going to say, well, we should shoot all the socialists, or we should shoot all the right-wingers. But when they sit down and think about it, they get back off that snarky reactive response. They'll say, well, that's really interesting. We do have a society that tolerates all of this. And maybe all of a sudden they'll start to open up and realize that, yes, I have beliefs that people don't agree with and people don't agree with me, but maybe we live in a society that allows us to do this. If we lived in Somalia, we would not have this. If we lived in Afghanistan, we would not have this. And the other thing that happens when you have this conversation around these four questions is that you start to see that there's common ground. In the first question, you'll learn, for example, why I grew up in a hardworking family and we believed in hard work and ethics, and you get rewarded for hard work, the Protestant ethic kind of stuff, and I believe in freedom and believe in America. And all of a sudden, well, so do I. I believe in hard work, and I believe in America, and I believe in ethics, and I believe in hard work gets rewarded. All of a sudden, we have common ground. And we build bridges.
It levels the playing field, I think, and it levels the. And I love that you said that it puts you on common ground. You can find something about this conversation to agree on and establish that rapport. because really all people prefer others like them. So I like that, it establishes a little bit more rapport. And even though you're not going to see eye to eye, you're going to, maybe have, give them the understanding. And I like that you also said, you're giving it to them. You can't necessarily expect it back from them. Because they don't necessarily know how to do this conversation.
That's right. We have far more in common with each other, than we have what separates us. But the problem is, there are people in this country who have a pulpit. They have an ability to try to separate us. And they heighten the small divisions for their own personal profit. And that is a singular problem. And so when we start having personal conversations and realize that we've got a lot in common, yeah, we have some differences, and maybe they're important differences, but we have far more in common than we have difference, and start recognizing that there are people out there who do not want us to have common ground. Because if we have a common ground, we will not watch divisive political stuff. We will not deal with politicians who are divisive. We want people to support the common ground. And that scares the crap out of those people who believe in divide and conquer.
Yeah.
Of which there's a sizable group of people at all levels of government.
Absolutely.
Who see their power, position, and privilege being threatened by commonality as opposed to divisiveness.
So getting into the emotions again, what would you say are what's the primary difference between having emotional intelligence and emotional competence? And why is it super crucial to know the difference?
You can't learn emotional intelligence. I just invalidated 500 different companies on the internet who all say, come to me, I'll teach you how to be emotionally intelligent. They're lying to you. Why? Well, let me ask you this. Can I teach you IQ? No. Emotional intelligence is a test. It's a form of social intelligence developed by Mayer and Salovey back in the 1990s. Goldman stole it, wrote a best-selling book, has made a fortune off it. And the academic world and the commercial world are totally at odds, because the academic world says you guys are claiming way more than what the science shows. And the commercial world is poo-pooing it all, saying if you take my emotional intelligence course, I'm going to make you into a successful CEO. It's a lie, because there's no science that supports this. What emotional intelligence measures is emotional competency. And emotional competency can be taught. You can learn emotional competency. No matter where you are in your career or your life, you can learn how to become emotionally competent. Emotional competency consists of 3 fundamental skills. The ability to be emotionally self-aware. What emotions am I experiencing in the moment right now? Mm-hmm. And emotional self-awareness is based on 3 concepts: interoception, affect, and emotion. So you have to learn what the heck is, what's he talking about? Interoception. It's what is going on, how your brain is perceiving the physical state of your body in the moment, your viscera, primarily through the polyvagal system. Affect are the feelings of pleasantness and unpleasantness, of which there are 9 total affect that we're born with. I use Sylvan Tompkins' model. And so interoception triggers affect, and then out of affect, we cognitively create what we call emotion. So you need to know all that stuff. And then you learn how to become aware of interoceptively what's going on in your body. You become aware of your affective experience, and then you build an emotional database, which you're supposed to be doing from 2 years old on. But as I said before, you don't, because you're invalidated, which is why so many people are emotionally immature as adults. So you can learn that. But even coming out of a dysfunctional family, these are all skills that can easily be mastered. Then the second thing is emotional self-regulation. And that's the ability to make a choice against the emotional experience you're having. I don't think you have, but you've certainly probably been in the presence when you were younger of people who were so angry they wanted to put their fist through a wall, or maybe you even witnessed people putting a fist through a wall. That is emotional non-regulation. They are having a strong affective, unpleasant experience. The only way the body knows how to get rid of that experience is by taking violent action. And so people punch their fist through a wall. And this is the source of most domestic violence. And it's also the source of most crime. So we have to learn how to, when we have extreme frustration, let's say, we need to be able to regulate ourselves and choose behaviors that conflict with the emotional experience we're having. And then the third skill we need to develop is empathy. Two kinds of empathy: cognitive empathy and affective empathy. And these are skills that have to be taught and learned. We're not born with empathy. We have an ability to have empathy, but we've got to learn how to do it. And the affect labeling, the reflecting emotions that we were describing earlier, that is empathy. That is known as cognitive empathy. Just as I can teach it to you, I've taught it to thousands and thousands of life inmates and thousands of people outside. It is a skill that is easily learned, mastered it can be learned in a couple of hours. It can be mastered in a couple of weeks if you practice it. It's not difficult. The beauty of it is when you learn empathy, you build your emotional self-regulation and you build your emotional self-awareness. You actually become more emotionally competent over time as you learn how to listen to and reflect other people's emotions. It's an amazing process. And our brains are hardwired for this kind of growth. So anybody can do it.
That was so eloquently stated. So basically, the awareness, it's that felt sense. It's like learning to really listen to the sensations ultimately that you're getting, and then being able to take control of those sensations, what you're going to physically do with that. And then ultimately having that ability to empathize with yourself, with others. And I love that it's not something that's going to take a long time to learn.
No, it's 4 to 6 weeks for most people. There are a few people that have taken longer, but that's because they have to overcome their childhood programming. And they were so shamed as children and they were so put in straitjackets around culturally how to listen. They're pleasers, or don't interrupt, or don't be selfish, or don't tell people how they feel. They grew up in families where emotions are really, really evil. Those people, they have to overcome that programming, and it takes them a little longer.
How can people start to learn to do this?
Well, let me give you the page again that people will be able to access after the show. And this is the fastest, quickest way for people to learn. And it goes from free to invest, so there's something there for everybody. DougNoll.co /power of your mind. And free ebook. That for most people, start with the ebook. Everything I've talked about with you is in the ebook. If you want to go deeper into this, get the book, De-escalate. You can get it on that page. If you want to learn if you've got angry people right now and you really need to learn how to de-escalate somebody quickly, get the video course. And if you really want to learn emotional competency, you can take the emotional competency courses. I have a basic and an advanced. And for your listeners, there's a 50% off coupon there that they can use. That is, in my opinion, that's the fastest, most efficient way to develop these skills, is through the resources that I'm providing on this page. And I'm not saying this because I'm trying to hype myself or anything like that. I'm 70 years old. I've gotten more awards, more recognition, more money than it's about helping other people learn skills that are going to change their lives. That's what I'm really interested in. And here are I put them into a nice, neat little package, and people can choose whatever resonates with them. And I'll also say that not everybody's ready for this work. You have to be ready. You have to be ready for it.
Yeah. Yeah, you definitely do. And I think listening to a podcast like Power of Your Mind, most of my listeners are probably at that stage where they're ready. And I'm just, really, really honored to have had somebody like you on the show teaching people this powerful stuff that we need, and we absolutely need. And so it's my wish that my listeners will go over to your page and get their hands on any level of this to start the ball rolling and start to learn this. One last thing before I close out today's episode, I want to have you talk a tiny little bit about your Prison of Peace project.
So prison, as I said before, Prison of Peace started in 2010. It was co-founded with my colleague Laurel Coffer and I, who were invited into the largest, most violent women's prison in the world to train women who are life inmates how to become peacemakers. Enormously successful in that prison. We were in there for 3 years. Then the prison was repurposed to a men's prison, and we thought we were done. We were going to follow the women around to 2 other women's prisons in California, but that didn't, well, actually, we did follow them down to CIW, the Central California Institute for Women in Southern California, and we still have a very robust program down there. We had problems getting into the Central California Women's Facility for reasons that aren't important. But what happened was that the warden transferred, I mean, he was the same warden, Ron Davis, in the women's prisons with the men's prison, and he personally asked us to come in and do Prison of Peace. And then the Family Inmate Council, I mean, we got a lot of pressure to come in. We said, no, it was all pro bono. We were not getting paid to do this work. And this is post collapse, and but neither one of us was making a lot of money at that time in our mediation practices. So we said yes, eventually. And it turned out that project at Valley State Prison is now still one of our most powerful Prison of Peace projects. And from there, we stayed there for 2 or 3 years. And then finally the state recognized the power of what we were doing, and we started getting some grants. And so in 2017, we were about to wrap everything up and just call it quits. But the state said, no, we're gonna pay you, give you grant money. And we expanded into, over the years, they've given us fairly significant grants to allow us to expand into 15 other prisons. And what's really cool is that as our inmates get paroled and they get cleared, we can have them go back in as trainers. So here are people who have lived a life of incarceration, going back in and modeling for the currently incarcerated population what it's like to be a peacemaker and a mediator, and teach them how to do it. What
a great project.
It's amazing. It's the most amazing work I've ever done in my life.
That is amazing. That is amazing. Well, Doug, it has been a pleasure to have you on the show, and I'm so glad that you were here and teaching us these techniques, and really during this time when I think people could use it the most. But, even beyond when we finally do get past all of this craziness, right. These are life techniques that that people absolutely need. And I just hope that this word spreads and gets into the school system, gets into families, gets integrated into people early on. So if you're here and listening to this show, just go to the dougnoll.co/power of your mind, get your free ebook, How to Calm an Angry Person, and take it from there. Thank you so much, Doug. This has been an amazing show and lots of great information.
Well, Victoria, thanks for having me and sharing me with your audience. And I hope together that we can inspire people to go out and make peace in the world.
Amen.